Welcome to our channel. This is my Uncle Simon. Him and his wife Denise built a beautiful second home right here in Libby, Montana. A few days ago, Marvin and I, along with Jerome, met Simon at his house to interview him about the book that he wrote, Leaving the Amish to Serve with Honor. It is a story of how he grew up in the old order Amish culture, and later he left the church to join the military. This interview is very interesting, and I hope you enjoy it.
For those of us who have grown up in a culture, for us it was the Amish, it's a personal choice to decide to remain in that culture. Simon, was there a defining moment when you just felt maybe in your spirit that the old order Amish lifestyle was not cut out for you? Was there anything that happened, or was it just a gradual knowing? Kind of curious. While most people have a different story, I'm not sure if I've ever heard your story on that. What was the determining factor, or how old were you when you decided that this is not the lifestyle for me?
I can't say that it was ever really in my mind that it was my lifestyle, especially since there's an incident happened when I was about 5 years old. I barely remember it, but I do remember it. My brothers caught a Canada goose that was injured, and they put it in a pen in the barn, and I was just a little tyke there walking around, and they called the game warden to come pick it up. That was the first time I ever saw anyone in uniform as far as law enforcement or anything else, and from that moment on, I just wanted to be in either the military or law enforcement. And I was just a kid, so I didn't really think that, but I was so fascinated by this game warden. And as time went on, of course, I began to see people in the military and so on, and it just strengthened that feeling that I had, to the point where when I was probably 12 or 15, somewhere in there, I was pretty sure that I was not going to stay with the Amish. Mm-hmm. But I couldn't talk about it, of course, but I kept gravitating toward that law enforcement, military lifestyle. And by the time I was 18 and made my first attempt, my reason for leaving was not only because the Amish lifestyle just simply wasn't for me, but I wanted to pursue that law enforcement or military career.
Gotcha.
And that is what drove me from that point forward. But I would say that the seed that was planted was when I was approximately 5 years old.
That's very interesting. Very interesting.
So go ahead.
So, your dad, was he, what was his place in the Amish? Was he, it would be my grandfather. Was he a bishop, or was he just a pastor? He
was actually a bishop at the time that I left.
Okay.
He was the elder of the church, the leader. And I think if I remember right, he was ordained a minister in 1974. I think that's when it was. And then later on he was ordained a bishop and was basically in command of the church.
Gotcha. And in the book, we read that you had somewhat of a unique relationship with your dad. There's some of the Amish youth, when they step out, like their parents will just completely disown them. In your book, even though he was very strict in what he believed as far as within the structure of the church, sounds like he still had a very unique relationship with you where he still wanted to have a relationship with you and was open to you coming back and visiting him. Unlike some of my friends, they were told that they couldn't come back. I have friends of mine that if they wanted to visit their parents, they had to wear Amish clothes and they couldn't park their vehicle on his property. That was the term. So even though you grew up in a very strict sect, sounds like you still had, a better relationship with your dad than a lot of them that leave.
Yes, and it may stem back from when I was a child, 2.5 months old, when my mother passed. My father had to serve a role as mother and father to me, and I believe that during that time, probably we got a closer bond than perhaps most children do. And another thing, my dad was a realist. He understood that once I made the choice to leave the Amish, it didn't matter if I changed clothes to come home. The heart had to be changed, and my heart wasn't changing. So it didn't matter to him what I wore as long as it was modest.
Yeah.
But he knew that forcing me to wear Amish clothes to come home was not going to change anything.
Right.
As far as realistically what I was doing. It wasn't going to change that. So he never required it.
Right. Awesome. He understood the heart issue.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, he did.
So Simon, tell me about a little bit. I know you wrote it in the book, but tell the audience maybe the first 5, 8, 10 years of your life, beginning from birth. You had quite an incident that happened. Just briefly, so the people can get an idea of maybe where you're coming from.
Yeah, so I was born in 1962, and I'm still 29 years old. So anyway, so I was living a normal life. I was the youngest of 11 children, mother and father, and my mother. When I was 2.5 months old, my mother passed away from a blood clot. So that put us in a bit of a hard times. Dad had to take over. We had 3 children basically in diapers, and so he had to take over his mother and father. And of course, the sisters helped out. Mary's mother, Barbara. I remember her when I was 2 or 3 years old. I remember her maybe mostly taking care of me in the most of the time. The others all helped out, of course, but growing up, we had it was a little more difficult. I didn't realize what it was like to have a mother. I never really knew my mother. Well, of course I didn't, but so I would see other children with mothers, and they would go to their mom when they had a problem or so. And I didn't have that. I went to my father, and I'm not sure that in the Amish culture, a father is not always as warm as a mother, perhaps, and so a lot of things kind of got overlooked a little bit. And so in the school, if I got picked on a lot, I would go to my father and tell him about it, and he didn't listen quite like he should have. And he would tell me to just forgive and turn the other cheek. Well, at some point, I told my father, and most of this is in the book, but I don't want to give out everything, because there are people spend good money on this book, and I don't want to ruin it for them. So, but he would tell me to turn the other cheek and forgive them. Well, at some point, I told him that I think both my cheeks had about all they can take. But I had a good life as a child. I didn't know any different. I played with toys. I interacted with other children, and I don't know. It was pretty normal, I guess, as far as I know. It was kind of a normal life.
So, in the book, your school life was drastically different than mine. There's multiple churches that send their children to one school. And there was bickering and bullying going on, which was zero tolerance in our school. There was, of course, a couple boys that would maybe start bickering out behind the barn, but the teacher was always on the playground. So And it's different people's story. Very interesting. I grew up and I just thought every Amish school was run the way it's ours was. And I read your book and I was like, wow, he really dealt with a lot of bullies, bickering and being picked on. Stuff that was just zero tolerance for us.
That was just, I'm thinking if you had a mother, Simon, that bullying would have not happened that way.
Oh, I totally agree with you there.
Because when I read how you got bullied, I mean, I don't know that if it would have happened to my child, that I would have stepped in really fast. So
For sure.
But I can see your life, it didn't affect you. In fact, it made you stronger.
I believe it did. And I don't want to give everything away that's in the book, but there was a rumor that started among the Plain people when I was an infant. And the rumor was about my sister and my father. And to this day, 60 years later, this rumor still surfaces. But it was very strong in circulation when I was a child going to school. And without giving too much away, it affected how I was treated in school and through my teenage years and even as an adult. And when I would go home and tell Dad how bad I was being bullied in school and so on, we didn't call it bullying back then. It was other kids picking on you. So we did it that way, and he didn't take it as serious as maybe you should have. I don't blame him for it. He had a lot on his shoulders. But it did affect me, and it affected me through my growing up years, and knowing that nobody was going to do anything about it, on occasion I would handle it myself. Probably not the right way. I wrote about it in the book, but I don't want to give it away. So I would handle it, and I learned to cope with it and to deal with it. And bullying is not accepted, and neither are rumors. Rumors are very painful, and I try very hard not to rumor about something. So, having said that, I am also not an advocate for parents to totally protect their children against some bullying. I do believe that children build character by learning with the parents' backup on how to deal with bullying. Not just be totally protected from it, but let them figure out a way to deal with it. And let the parents back them up.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, we end up with a generation of children who cannot deal with life's problems. And had that happened to me, I would never have dealt with the problems I dealt with the rest of my life.
I think today they now call it, they need a safe space or something like that.
Not to get too politically correct, but I hate to do that.
I don't really know some of the challenges that you faced, needing a high school diploma or a GED, getting a driver's license, all that stuff is something that, well, for instance, the Amish don't go to high school.
Right.
They don't have a GED. And the challenge is just the legal paperwork that you have to have in order to get that. Get the book. It's all in there. Very interesting.
So I'm going to read one paragraph to you. This was after I was in boot camp for a while, and it might give you a taste of what the book is about. So, growing up Amish, of course, meant there was zero tolerance for violence. Now, violence to me meant beating someone with your fist or perhaps a wagon spoke. The word assault meant the same thing to me as violence. Blame it on the fact that English was, after all, my third language. And maybe that is why I didn't understand the true definition of assault. Had I known that giving a person a slight nudge would be considered assault, I probably would not have committed such a crime. During the aftermath of the alleged assault, my CC took the opportunity to explain to me the definition of assault. I am grateful to him for taking the time and to make sure that I understood what assault meant, and that is not tolerated in the military, except against the enemy, so I governed myself accordingly from that moment forward. There's just a taste of what it's like, what the book sounds like, so hopefully you'll find it interesting and maybe want to read it.